Lieutenant Colonel Davis, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it is my pleasure.
Great. First question about U.S.'s strategy in Afghanistan, the war strategy. The U.S. stepped up airstrikes on Taliban leaders, but at the same time, the strategy, the war strategy, is vague. Where does the U.S. stand when it comes to war in Afghanistan?
Well, that's been one of my great frustrations from the very beginning, because if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, how will you ever know if you do? And as you say, it's extremely vague. So make sure that Afghanistan never becomes a launching point for terrorist attacks on the United States again, and a couple of others that are even more vague than that. Well, the problem is, how do you measure that? Because that goal by itself is impossible. There's no chance you can do that. You can't reduce or eliminate the entire country of Afghanistan from being used by terrorists or whatever, because it's just too big.
And the Hizb Islami party led by Gulbuddin Hekmatyar with the Afghan government, the peace talks were going very smoothly until this last point, and they're having some issues over the confirmation of the scheduled exit of the U.S. troops. They are looking for a reasonable scheduled exit in order to be able to conclude a peace deal.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that? When will be reasonable for the U.S. troops or foreign troops to leave Afghanistan?
Well, that whole dynamic is very interesting because, back a year and beyond, more than that, it used to be like a hardcore until the foreign forces are out, we can't even negotiate. It was hardcore. And then here about 6-8 months ago, it changed into, well, let's have more like a goal, actually. Yeah. So everybody said, well, then there's room to talk. So they talk. So now then they have this here. Well, the problem is, how is that going to match up with what our current plan is? I won't say strategy, but plan to leave the troops there, and how willing are the Afghan government and people going to be to agree to any of that? Because I was recently in Afghanistan a few weeks ago, and after talking with numerous people, really across the political divide and up and down the rank of former government officials, smaller people, everyone was agreed on. They said, if the U.S. withdraws its troops as scheduled in sometime early in 2017, they all thought it was like almost certain it would be a civil war. So they're all fearful that not just for the Taliban, there's a number of other factors that go into that. So the question is going to be, if that's really a fear among people, and even among the Afghan leadership, there's a knowledge that even though there's only 10,000 troops, U.S. troops there right now, they do keep Kabul safe, and it prevents anybody from coming in. So to have that removed and then to basically place the security on the goodwill of these, insurgent fighters, I'm thinking that's going to be a hard one to reach. So the significance of that is, if the government of Afghanistan is going to have a hard time actually agreeing to a withdrawal at all, much less a time schedule, I'm not sure where this tentative agreement, because it's not signed yet. They still call it a draft until it's signed. It was initialed. That's going to be a big problem.
So what it would be the best exit strategy for Afghanistan war? I mean, say 10 years from now on or 15 years from now on.
Yeah. The problem with even coming up with a good answer like that is because any solution would have to be based on the wreckage that we've accomplished over the last 15 years, and it is just horrific, like 7 or 8 different categories I could go into of how messed up it is right now. So in order to even come up with what is a good exit strategy, first of all, you have to actually have a strategy. You have to have something that's attainable, something to be accomplished within a reasonable time period, and something that's an affordable, both in personnel and in treasure. And so once you have those things identified, the very basic, now that you can start saying, what are we going to do? For example, the claim that right now for the 10,000 troops that we have militarily, they say, well, we need to keep as many troops there as possible to accomplish this, these counter-terrorist attacks or whatever. That's impossible. If we couldn't do that with 150,000 NATO troops, 10,000 U.S. troops certainly are not going to do any of that. So that goal is not even achievable. So you're saying you have a military strategy or tactics that can't be accomplished. Well, once you have your strategy, first you have to ditch that. Now there is some justification to keep those troops there, because of the stability that it represents. So you can say, all right, well, for example, this is one of my recommendations, once we get the strategy part fixed, is that you can say, all right, we're going to go for like a period of, say, 5 years of the same 10,000 support we got right now.
Right.
And then like 2 years later, it's going to step down a little bit, and then 3 years later, it's going to be removed. So you have a known period in there of given support. So you have time for the Afghan government, the Afghan military to say, okay, we know we have a for sure end date here, so we better get our house in order. And then, the question is, well, okay, what if they're still not? What if 7 years from now it's still just like it is right now? And at my point, that's at 20 years, and the U.S. cannot sign up to be the permanent force there to defend. And so then they're going to have to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, uncertain situation. In your latest article, you talked about U.S.'s involvement in Afghanistan and the shortcomings of the U.S.'s military part. What are these shortcomings?
Well, it all goes back yet again to strategy. What are you trying to accomplish with the military? Again, one of my biggest frustrations throughout this entire war is you're saying you're trying to accomplish some grand strategic outcome that can't be done. So, but you're operationally doing who knows what, all different kinds of things. Sometimes it's counterterrorism, sometimes it's night raids, sometimes it's counterinsurgent, sometimes it's backstopping the Afghan troops. It's all these different things. Well, tactically, we've probably succeeded in like 99% of everything we've ever done. So you can say, yes, it's been a great roaring success, but what does it accomplish strategically? What does it accomplish toward the goal of ending the war? And it's virtually nothing. So the biggest concern is that we can accomplish many things tactically, but if we don't know the strategy, then how are you going to accomplish anything? And I can give you an example. So especially when I was there in 2011 at the height of the surge, and there was 15 different brigade combat teams, which are about 7,000 troops, whatever. So they were in a process of rotating in and out and all this. So I go to visit one brigade and talk to their operations people and their commanders, and they say, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to accomplish these 4 things right here, and we've made good progress, and we're leaving in 2 months, and we're really proud of what we've accomplished. Well, then 3 months later, I went back to visit the new group that had come in and say, so what are you guys doing? They didn't know that I'd been there before, and they goes, we're doing these 4 things over here, and we're doing this and that. I'm like going, wait, but these other 4 things, what happened to them? Well, those really aren't as important. We think these are. So each group comes in, because there's no strategy that says, here's what we're going to accomplish, then every group that comes in does the best they can, and they say, well, based on what I have, I think this is the best. But there's no guiding strategy, so all 15 of those brigade combat teams were free to do however they interpreted it, and of course the follow-on groups interpreted it a different way. And the result is that you have just what's called tactical action. You're doing stuff, but you're accomplishing nothing. People are dying, people are being wounded, civilians are being wounded, even Taliban, U.S. people, for no gain. And that's a big frustration to me.
You indicated that one cause for the failure was that Washington took the easy way out, and by putting the Northern Alliance's leading figures in power. To whom you're pointing at this point?
Well, primarily the State Department, and I think 2 major areas. Number one is the immediate aftermath of the successful military attack in October 2001. I think it was December in the Bonn Agreement was the first place, and then the second one came in 2014 when Secretary Kerry negotiated the unity government situation. Both of those, I think, were disaster, because the first one, by December of 2001, so barely 2 months after the initial bombs started falling and the Taliban had been disintegrated at that point, we're already putting in place a government here. Well, there's obviously no time to do any kind of vetting or research or study or anything else. So we just put in whoever the guys that helped us on the ground the most, and basically carte blanche believed everything that they told us. So they're like, we're the terrorists, we're these guys. And so they would very often give their political opponents as this. And so we would go in and take care of a lot of that. And and many of them have committed just unspeakable atrocities to the Afghan people. And now then you're going to put them, they are, at the highest levels of government and in charge of many things here.
Like whom? I mean, if you want to,
Well, there's a number of them. Dostum comes to mind because he had done quite a bit of things during the Civil War part, and then there's some other things which I'm not allowed to talk about because they were security back in the day.
Right. Besides that, you also pointed out to areas of ANDSF's deficiencies. What are these areas, and how come the United States, I mean, being there, knowing the situation on the ground, but not being able to help the Afghan forces, the military forces, to help them in those areas? Why, some people ask me, why, I mean, Afghans, when I go to Afghanistan, they're like, why United States is giving weapons and military assistance to Pakistan, but not to Afghanistan? We need it.
Yeah, I believe there was, it was, what, a year and a half ago, maybe, where we had given, when we're starting to draw down, we'd given a lot of our heavier armored vehicles to Pakistan.
Yes.
And I know it was a big point of contention that, well, why you not give it to us, whatever. This is also another ramification of the, let's just do the least difficult thing that we can. So it's easy to go in and say, all right, we're going to train you on these things, we're going to send in advisors, and we're going to do that. And you can, and you'll succeed every time in raising it up to some level what it is. But is that going to make them sustainable? I've been arguing this since 2009, that you can't have this big target of Afghan military forces and police forces that you think is going to provide security right now, but then you know you can't possibly maintain that. So what are you going to do when the numbers start coming down, even on that side, because you can't afford it? And so when you can't afford it, people start getting paid, and they start going, where else can they go to find money? Well, oftentimes it's to the Taliban, or to other insurgent groups, or even to some of these warlords who are very happy to bring them on board. And that does nothing for the unity of the government. But I actually also have a bit of scratch in my head on, it's clear that without logistics, without domestic intelligence gathering capabilities, medical evacuation, some of what are the less sexy parts of military operations, but without which you can't do the actual, at the point of contact kind of thing. And those things, you don't have to have, been in the military more than a month to know that without those things, you can't sustain. So it doesn't matter how good you've trained them to actually tactically operate if they can't. And that was highlighted just vividly on my last trip to Afghanistan earlier this month, when there was a situation that developed in the eastern part of the country, in Kunar. And a fellow that I had known when I was here in 2010, 2011, who was a cultural advisor to U.S. forces in the East, came to visit me. And so it was a really nice visit, but he said he was concerned because he goes, right then at that moment, as he had been trying to come here, there had been a washout in the road, on the only road that supplies that part of the whole, near the border of Pakistan. And so the government had tried, just bulldozers, whatever, to try to fix it. Well, the Taliban had taken up a position on one of the mountains on the side, and so that they could bring them under fire, and they prevented them from clearing the road. Well, they can't get supplies in there, so that all the forces that were north of that were completely cut off, because they hardly had, just a handful of helicopters that could get stuff, and they could carry so little they couldn't provide the security for them. But the Afghan didn't have indigenous air power to go after them. And our restricted rules of engagement are, we can send air power, but it's not anti-Taliban, it's anti-terrorist. So if it's Al-Qaeda or something, we can. So apparently we didn't provide any of that, and so they have no means of getting those snipers off the tall mountains. Well, that was one problem. The second one was, he said on an enduring case, he said there's two of the bases which, in fact, one of I had met him in eastern Afghanistan. It was Kop Monte was one of them. He says, you guys withdrew in whatever year it was, 2013, 2014, from that area, and the Afghan National Army took over to those two bases. He said, problem is, he goes, they can't even get off the base. Basically, all they're doing is defending themselves on those two spots. And I said, well, why is that? And he goes, because the Taliban have the positions on this high ground all around, and anybody who gets outside, some of them are heavy machine guns. So they open the gate, they start going on patrol, they're immediately taken under fire, and they can't take them out. And so they're basically prisoners in there, and so they have to, stay out of sight. And the Taliban leaves them alone inside there as long as they stay.
As
so
long as
they're
stay
okay
inside.
with that. But he said that they almost never they don't ever do any day patrols, and they rarely do even any at night because they can't defend themselves. And the thing that really stood out to me about that was, and another thing I discovered on this last trip, he said, he goes, you know, the Afghan National Army guys are great. Most of the people are encouraging and sympathetic to them, and they wish they could do more things. It's not like they hate the military or anything. Yeah. He goes, you know, they're very patriotic and they want to do the right thing. He said, but they can't. And so without air power, without even, you know, aerial helicopter resupply kinds of things, and without medical evacuation, people get wounded and they die. So where's your motivation to get off the base? Well, obviously, he said, then the people aren't getting any protection from the government because they can't. So those are the significant consequences of not having the ability to do those less sexy military tasks.
You proposed a set of solutions for the crisis in Afghanistan. The first one, and the one that stood out to me, was the one that you said that the U.S. foreign and defense policymakers should get a grip and understand the local and regional dynamics. What are they missing in Afghanistan right now?
Well,
in this regard.
In that regard, the situation is we send over so many people, whether military or diplomatic personnel, and they rotate in every 6 to 9 to sometimes 12 months, and then they rotate back out. And so you have almost every day you have people with maximum of 1 year experience on there. So by the time you start to figure anything out about culture and what's going to work, then you're gone and somebody else comes in to start from scratch. The consequence of that is, if I don't have a thorough understanding of the dynamics, not merely the culture, the language, but the nature of this group, the nature of that group, this political entity, this this warlord over here who kind of plays both sides. If you don't understand how all those things work, then you may come up with a solution which looks great to you, which might look great in Washington, D.C. over in Foggy Bottom, but will be disaster on the ground there. But if you don't have a thorough understanding of what's going on the ground, you're not going to know.
You talked to a lot of people in Afghanistan. You mentioned Pakistan earlier. What did you find out about Afghans' feeling towards Pakistan? Because most of them think the main source of insecurity in Afghanistan is Pakistan.
Yes, I actually visited by design people from all across the political spectrum, different organizations that had different philosophies on how government should be run. Some supported Ghani, some supported Abdullah, and then just kind of everybody in between. And people had opinions all over the map. They were conflicting in some cases and all this, except for the point of Pakistan. When it came to Pakistan, there was complete unanimity. I mean, people I interviewed in cafes on the side of the street that I just met, or members of the Mashrano Zerga, or everything in between, all were adamant about that. And as a matter of fact, one of the members of the upper house, who asked me not to use his name because he's not supposed to talk on some of this stuff, said he had visited with some of his Pakistan counterparts in the parliament. And said he had asked them, you know, why are you guys doing this? And why don't you stop? And he says, well, of course we're doing it, the Pakistan member of parliament said. And we can stop it, and we would. But in order to do that, you know, you guys are going to have to do several things. And he said he listed off 2 or 3 things, which, I mean, and almost all of them were impossible for the Afghan government to agree to. One of them, the most prominent one, was they wanted to redo the Durand line in their favor and move it back on the side of the Kunar River in some places so that they could have the water rights and all that. And no government in Afghanistan could ever agree to ceding their land just for you to stop doing illegal things in your country. And so he said, well, he said, you know we can't do that. He goes, then I guess we'll continue on.
We have to do it.
And so they all agreed with that. But the big complaint is, as an American, I was over there and I was greeted very nicely and treated very nicely, and people just said, you know, even for example, I'd asked, you know, some of these mistakes that we'd made, like in Kunduz, where we killed a lot of civilians, and we'd done a number of those over the years. People are actually saying that they hated that, they didn't like it, but they understood that it wasn't on purpose, and that you're really doing a lot to try to help us as best you can over here. But then you get to the point of Pakistan and they're going, but why don't you stop that? The Pakistan military are taking actions that are actually killing American troops. that are resulting in their deaths and wounding, and not to mention the fact that that keeps the insurgency going. So why is America not stopping this? Why are they not using some of the many diplomatic tools they have to put pressure on Pakistan to cease that support? And all of them scratch their heads, and so far I've been scratching my own head. I don't really understand that, because there's things that we could do. See, I think that you
Not
could,
to mention the coalition support fund that they're getting.
well,
Billions of dollars.
Well, that was one of the other. There's like, why are you guys giving them billions of dollars? And
Right.
you know, and yeah, there was a lot of frustration on that. But see, my point is, or my belief is, that the war could be ended not militarily but diplomatically. So if we could get with Pakistan and say, look, you've got some legitimate national security concerns. Let's talk, if to the extent that we can, let's find a win-win situation so we can concern that. But we're going to stop this. That's the bottom line. We're going to stop this. So because Pakistan does have some, whether they're justified or not, they're concerned about, you know, India and how all this works around, and some of the other states, and even the aftermath of Afghanistan after we leave. So we can address some of those. But the bottom line is, my position would be, okay, we're going to discuss things and win-win, but the end result is going to be the cessation of that support. That's going to happen. So now, how can we get this done at the least displaced full? And we'll help you out afterwards. But we're going to have this. But for some reason, it doesn't appear that we've done that, and I really don't understand why.
Some Afghans think that creating two heads of state helped by kind of creating a balance within the system. Balance between the two sides, major parties, and but some think it's against the Constitution, and it adds and increases the political rivalries and tension among Afghans themselves. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, in my personal opinion, it's unequivocally bad. We made this deal in 2014 after the second, presidential election, which was marred by all kinds of irregularities. And instead of dealing with that and doing the hard work of saying, all right, we're going to, whether it's going to do the election again, whether it's going to actually count and publicly reveal what the results were, whatever it needs to be, we have to deal with the hard stuff there. But instead, there was, the concerns that there was actually corruption on both sides, and so they said, well, let's just let both of you play, and we'll come at that. So you averted a crisis in 2014, but in my estimation, we have now caused an even larger crisis, especially heading in. The deal that was made was that we're supposed to go for 2 years, and then we're going to have parliamentary and other elections, and then they were going to have Aloy Jirga, and they were going to, try to figure all this out. Well, there's no chance that they're going to have the election this year, and the people that I talked to said that they expect that, when it comes around to next year, they're going to go, well, now it's so close to the next presidential election, we'll just wait and do it all then. And so the result is going to be that this will continue the full 5 years. Well, it's not a case, in my estimation, it's not a case where having those two parties it created a balance. What it created was dysfunction to the point of almost non-functioning. And it's been getting worse over time, because I talked to many members of parliament and many others who were experts in the political affairs, and this was another area of just about complete unanimity, is that they said that, you have this side, all the people that helped him get elected are basically calling in favors here. This other side here, well, they've got the same thing, and so on the things that the ministries that this side's supposed to have, whatever, they still have to have it within the government to agree to all these things. Well, that means the ones that I put in there, I won't like that outcome. So if you don't do this for me, then I'm not going to agree here. And the result is, however, 2.5 years later, we still don't have a minister of defense, for example.
Exactly.
The other big consequence of that, I think, was when I was in Kabul on this last trip. It was exactly 1 week after that last horrific bombing, where 400 people were killed and wounded, and so that was a really open and raw wound throughout Kabul. And so President Ghani addressed a unified body of parliament, which apparently had never happened before. They said it was unprecedented. And so he gave this really impassioned speech, then we got to come together, we got to overcome these things, and we, because and he mentioned Pakistan as being one of the big problems with it. The Taliban are the enemy, and here's what we're going to do. We're going to all this you know, really emotional and supportive stuff.
Speech.
People I talked to said they were impressed with that. However, who wasn't there? Abdullah. And why wasn't he there? He was not there because, as I was told, the Afghan constitution lays out how that joint session is supposed to be laid out, where everybody sits and all this.
Right.
And of course it doesn't have a chief executive because there isn't one. We just made that up in 2014. And so as a result, Abdullah wanted to be sit where the top people were. And there's no spot for that. So they were going to put him down here where this nearly important people were. There was more of them. He said, no, we're going to go up here. And there's one member of parliament that said that, you know, we negotiated till 1:30 in the morning before the speech, and finally he wouldn't agree to it, so he didn't show up. And so how are you going to be calling the nation to unity when the CEO, the co-head, won't come because he didn't get a chair in the right place? And that's a strong signal. And on that same point, everybody, even supporters of Abdullah and whatever, they all said they liked what the president said, and they were really hopeful of success, but they said they kind of have a wait and see attitude because they're wondering, do you have the ability to deliver on what you're saying here?
Right.
And my concern is that if he doesn't, and if it doesn't work out right, that the speech may actually work to ultimately counter purposes, because then the confidence in the government will be even lower, which is saying something.
Your last words, whatever can help the situation in Afghanistan, to the Afghan authorities and to the American authorities.
The one other thing I saw while I was there that was very positive and optimistic is there are some fantastic people in Afghanistan. Brilliant, smart people, educated people, just I mean, great common sense and some good ideas irrespective of their level of education. They want to do the right thing. They want to follow the rule of law. And they want to see change, especially the younger generation, not surprisingly. They really want to see just no corruption and just follow the rule of law so that we can all live in peace. And if somehow we could get some of them into positions of authority over time and elevate them up into there, then I think that could bring a welcome change into Afghanistan. But the people who are in charge right now, if my message is anything, is you've got to, in the interest of your country, and dig deep down into find the real patriotism and your love for your land, and set aside your personal desires and start elevating some of these younger generation who want to come in and set things right, and they want to set the right example. Give them a chance. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much. And to the American authorities.
Well, if I would say do the hard work that's necessary. Quit trying to get out as fast as we can. Quit trying to take the easy way out of difficult situations. There's no easy answer. Do the hard work necessary to work through things that have a chance to win. And whatever your strategy is, make it something that has a legitimate chance of success, not something that sounds really good on paper.
Thank you very, very much for your time.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.